Welcome back to another edition of the Phantom Fuel Podcast, the official voice of the Nebraska Air National Guard. I'm your host, RJ, and I'm back to thank you for making us part of your day, whether you're on the road, in the shop, or taking a well-earned break. We hope you all had an amazing 4th of July celebration, and if you missed our special patriotic edition in episode 7, now is a great time to go back and give it a listen. The feedback has been incredible, and we'd love for more of you to check it out. Before we jump in, let's talk about something exciting. Starting this month, we're launching a giveaway for every review submitted using the link in the show notes and every comment left on Spotify through the 10th of November 2025. Your name goes into our imaginary hat. That's right. Each episode review and comment can get you a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card, with the winner announced in our episode 12 one-year celebration this coming December. 2 chances per month through November 10th, one via feedback and one via Spotify comment. Now let's get into episode 8. In this episode, I'm diving deep into the heart and soul of service with a returning and highly requested guest, Chaplain Col Hollist. This time, we're tackling a thought-provoking question: what's the difference between religion and spirituality? We'll break down what each term means, how they shape us, and how both can play powerful roles in mental health, emotional, and spiritual resilience, whether in uniform or in civilian life. And this is just the start. Also in this episode, a reminder for Nebraska Air Guard members to check their yearly point totals so you don't come short. Since this episode is getting released shortly after August drill, you only have 1 more month to check those points, so don't go short. We're also giving you highlights from across the Nebraska Army National Guard, a preview of upcoming community events to get on your calendar, and a summer safety check-in as we wind down the 101 critical days of summer and back to school safety. So let's jump into it right here. Let's give a warm welcome back to Chaplain Col Hollist for a continuation of our popular episode 6 discussion. If you haven't listened to that, go back and check that one out. It was awesome. This time focusing on an important follow-up: religion versus spirituality. We define both terms. Religion is a structured set of beliefs and practices often tied to specific traditions or institutions. Spirituality is a broader, personal sense of meaning, purpose, and connection, often outside of formal systems. Col Hollist also shares how these concepts impact service members, how to support one another regardless of their belief systems, and how exploring faith or purpose can be an essential part of building an inner strength. Now, without further ado, here's the great conversation with Col Hollist.
The views expressed by our guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Air Force, Air National Guard, Nebraska Air National Guard, Nebraska National Guard, or any government agency.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Phantom Fuel Podcast. I'm RJ, and we had a lot of requests to bring back Lieutenant Col Hollist, and we're back to having a conversation again about, this time we're going to be talking about religion and spirituality and the differences between the two. If you missed the previous episode, go back. We learned a lot about Lieutenant Col Hollist and what he does and all that kind of stuff. He is obviously a member of the 155th Air Refueling Wing and part of the Chaplain Corps. But before we start talking about the difference between religion and spirituality, we've noticed that we missed a few things that the Chaplain Corps does and offers. So we want to kind of get that out there before we get there. So thank you for joining us, and welcome back. Thank you again. And I want to hit that before we talk about our main topic.
Yeah, and before we dive in, hey, I just want to say, if you heard religion and spirituality and you wanted to turn it off, please don't.
Yeah, please, yes.
Stick with us.
This is not something like, yeah, thank you. That's a great point.
There'll be no hellfire and damnation speeches going on here. We're just going to chat a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
So don't give up on us yet. And that's probably a good place to start with, what do the chaplains do? And so in the 155th, we have 3 chaplains and 4 religious affairs airmen. And that's what makes up the kind of chapel core of the unit. Different bases have different numbers of chaplain based on the number of service members that are there and kind of the needs and things like that. We have 3 chaplains, all from different faith backgrounds. And I think that that's only important to note, that the environment that we create in the chaplain's office is intended not to be faith specific or faith tradition specific or religion specific. And so one of the things that I think is important to understand about what the chaplains do is there's really kind of 3 different missions. One of those is advising leadership on different things that they request to understand the kind of morale of the units and also to understand kind of moral and ethical decisions that they need to make, stuff like that. The other thing we do is that we ensure that members have access to worship in the way that they want. Mm-hmm. Those 2 things take up very little amount of our time in reality. The bulk of our time is spent on what we call ministry of presence, and it's just being with the members. And so sometimes that's counseling, but sometimes it's us just walking around to units and saying, hey, how you guys doing? What's going on? What are you doing? And people love to show us what they do. Yeah. You know, you're a old services guy. So
yeah.
We go and we serve lunch with y'all. Yeah. And doing stuff like that's just so great for us to be around the service members and to just be there with them and to give them some encouragement and things like that. So a lot of what we do is just being with members and trying to be supportive and trying to bring kind of a good, positive environment and kind of encouraging people. And then there's the other piece of it that's, you know, the counseling side. And so meeting with people and talking about their spirituality, talking about their struggles, talking about their mental health. And I know we talked on the other podcast about kind of confidential communication, and chaplains have confidential communication, which means you can come and talk to us about things and we can't report it unless you give us written permission to do so. And so that makes it a really good place for people to kind of explore and to talk about stuff, especially if they're talking about frustration and struggle that they're having with something that they're doing in the military or their personal life or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I think another thing that happens is home station, especially for traditional guardsmen, you know, you come out one weekend a month and you're really nose to the grindstone, getting to know things. And sometimes it's kind of tough to get to know chaplains. We always have this dynamic that on the back end of a deployment, people have gotten to know the chaplains better when they deployed than they ever do home station.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And you did have a conversation right before this about like understanding your role and your own like stress, mental health, because that's what we kind of talked about on our first podcast. Go check it out if you haven't listened to it again. Nice second plug there. But like once you recognize that, not waiting so long to get assistance or get help or things like that, because by that time, if you wait and you're super stressed and you can, maybe you won't recognize you need the help.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'll have people come in and they'll say right off the bat, like, I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. Is it okay if we talk? Like, yeah, of course. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's the reason why we wanted to have you back, because we had a lot of good feedback from the very first podcast that we did with you. And we've sat down with a number of guests, and they've been wonderful. But what we've noticed is that the difference between religious and spiritual kind of blend together. And then, like you said at the beginning, it's like, please don't shut it off, because you hear those 2 words and you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to talk about that. But understanding the differences can make a huge difference, not just in the military career, in your civilian world and all that kind of stuff. So before we get dive into too much deal, can we use your history and your background to explain the differences and all that?
Yeah. And I'll use, if you Google it, or if you use ChatGPT to get the definition in today's world, I guess. Or if you look at kind of military things, you're going to get a definition of religion and spirituality that's different. I'm going to just use my pragmatic way of thinking about it. And this is oversimplistic, but it's realistic, I guess. And I think religion is kind of these faith traditions. And so a religion is a collection of practices and behaviors and rituals that are tied to a specific group, a specific set of beliefs.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
and spirituality is just an individual's connection with a higher power, whatever they define that as. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes there's people who are religious and spiritual.
Yeah.
And they have this tie to an affinity for their kind of faith tradition. And they also have an investment in their own personal relationship with their higher power. There's also a lot of people who are spiritual and they have a personal investment and they have their personal practices that connect them to their higher power. And they don't have a specific faith tradition, right?
Yeah.
And then there's another group of people who have a faith tradition, and it functions a lot like culture, and it functions a lot like family identity, that we're a member of this faith group and I attend, but the investment that person may have to their own spiritual relationship with a higher power doesn't exist. And it's part of it's part of community. It's part of the community that I belong to. And so I think that's just a good way to think about it, that these things are separate, and sometimes they coexist, but sometimes they don't.
And that's fair. Cause I mean, like when I was telling you, and we were talking about like history and things like that. And I'll give a little bit of history of myself to the listeners and stuff. It's like, I was in CCD. I went through Catholic schools. I was confirmed, all that kind of stuff. And then certain things happened, and I kind of lost that religious part of it. But with everything that's happened in my life, I found a way to still be spiritual. And, I get teased about this a long time. I've been around a long time. I was a big Star Wars fan, and I'm a huge Yoda fan. So Yoda was kind of like somebody I cling to, be part of that. Now, as you went older and you're a Star Wars geek like I am, you realize the flaws of Yoda and all that kind of stuff. But when you're younger, you grab a hold of them, and that's your spiritual guidance, like always trying to be good, always trying to, push to the best and things like that. And, as you get older, you figure out more stuff. But in that instance, that's a good example of how you can be more spiritual, not religious. In your history of knowing that, how does being religious help you? How can being spiritual help you? And then sometimes when you say like that, both of them doesn't coexist, or sometimes it does, how does that work out with the individuals that you've come across?
That's a good question. I think that, like, let's tackle them one by one.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, for sure.
The benefits of religion and religious affiliation and religious practice is, besides the spiritual benefits, and full engagement in a religious practice generally leads someone to becoming more spiritual purposefully, right? Like I said, sometimes it's not, but the intent is that, right? Fundamentally, though, if I pull apart the spiritual part that I'm going to talk about in a second, and I just look at the kind of affiliation with a religion, one of the pieces that it gives is a sense of community.
Yep.
And community can be powerful. We talk about families and deployments and things like that. When we have members that deploy and their families back here in Nebraska, a lot of times if they have a faith tradition, a lot of times it's their church family that steps in when the washer breaks. It's their church family that comes when the window breaks, or whatever it is. And so there's power in community. There's power for support and things. And I think a lot of people, one of the things I get from religious affiliation, aside from the spiritual part of things, is the community part. And that there's real benefits to that. And then if we look at spirituality, that is really an individual journey. And spirituality, religious can be a collective experience. Spirituality is an individual experience.
Yep.
And so you can't be spiritual for somebody else.
I mean, you can help them, but you can't be that for them. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you can help, but that's their journey.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you grew up in a faith tradition, you are part of the community of that faith tradition. But somewhere along the way, you have to have your own spiritual journey. And that can sometimes be cohesive to the faith tradition, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is important is, if you look at the Air Force discussions around spirituality, it isn't discussions around religious adherence. It's discussions around spirituality, because if we look at readiness is an individual experience. I'm ready to deploy.
Right.
And as a group, we become ready to deploy as each individual is individually ready to deploy.
Right.
And so spirituality is my journey. It's my process. And so that's where spirituality is that personal relationship with some higher power, regardless of what that is. And it's interesting how you talked about Star Wars. It's interesting the range of things that trigger people to reach back to start their own spiritual journey. All kinds of things can trigger it. And sometimes it's the obvious ones, like a baby's born and it's my first kiddo, and I realize, I really want to raise this kid grounded in some belief in something greater than myself.
Right.
And that happens a lot when if you have your first baby and you're holding that first kid, that experience feels like there's something greater than me.
Yeah.
And that experience oftentimes pulls people back to think about their own belief in a higher power and their own spiritual journey.
I guess in that instance, is there a turning point? I'm kind of jumping my head on myself because I do have kind of a way to get there, but I'm kind of in this instance, I just want to jump ahead a little bit because the thought process of the spirituality and your religious, and I talk about like how I cling to something after I lost religion or spirituality. If for some reason you get to somebody that was like me when I was younger that has lost the spirituality or lost the religious or lost that sense of purpose, is there techniques or is there something out there that you've seen that could help somebody get back on that journey? Like you can start with yourself with the spirituality. You might necessarily, want to lean into the community of the religion part of it, or you want to, lean into the group or the community of the religion to get to that spirituality. How do we get there if you're starting to find yourself lost in that instance? I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I think that's a great thought process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, is like if somebody does find themselves in this space where they're like, I want this part of me to be more prominent. I want my spirituality to be something I take better care of. One of the first things is to recognize that their spiritual journey isn't intrinsically tied to their faith tradition.
Right, yeah.
It can be. And in many instances, it's powerful when it is, because their focus of their own spiritual journey and the community that can help them along that way is really a powerful combination, right? They might want to start with their own spiritual journey, and that might start with personal conversations through prayer or whatever they want to call that, personal conversations with what they believe to be the higher power.
Yeah.
And it might start there and just saying, I'm going to let myself speak what's in my heart. And sometimes that's enough to start to kind of think about, what do I want this to be?
Right.
What do I want this to look like? And then they kind of go follow that path, follow the journey, see where it takes you.
Yeah, I think, and the reason why I was asking this question is because I know in the religious part of it, sometimes you can go into confession, you go into a booth, you kind of talk to somebody and like, oh, I've done all this stuff. There's somebody there to listen to you. Yeah. That's the point of it, to listen to you. Yep. Yeah. Then they say, oh yeah, do 10 commandments or do 10 Hail Marys or, all that kind of stuff. But why can't the spirituality, not the religious part of it, become your solo venture to talk to yourself or talk to somebody else? It doesn't have to be in a booth. It could be to you, in the guard, or it could be while you're deployed. You could be talking to somebody like a friend or something like that. It's the same concept. It's just finding that individuality. Is there anything that you've seen taking while you're deployed for people that have having that journey? Like, oh, I wouldn't say lost, but like maybe they are lost, but they're coming in there and saying, okay, I've been here for a month. I still have 5 months to 8 months left, depending on how long they're there. If they come to you and say, hey, I'm struggling, where would you take them in that instance?
I think the way you set up the question is perfect. And I don't know that you intended, but the way you set it up is perfect, RJ, because you said like they want to work on that journey and they come to the chaplain. Well, the benefit of coming to a chaplain is that by default, I have to promise as a chaplain that I'm not going to try to steer people towards my faith tradition.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to help them live their own. So innately, when you come to a chaplain and you sit down with a chaplain, part of that conversation is, what do you want this to look like?
That's the hardest part of it, because you might not even know what you want.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well then let's explore it. And when you're talking to a chaplain that they're not going to try to covertly sneak you into their faith traditions.
Yeah.
What they're going to do is, because of what we're trained to do and what we promise that we're going to do, what we commit to doing as chaplains, is to help you on your journey and whatever that looks like. And we have to be willing to do whatever that looks like. And one of the things before, as we talk to pastors about, or church leaders about coming in as a chaplain, we're super, super transparent. Like, you cannot come in here if your intent is to convert people to your beliefs.
All right.
Then this is not the place for you.
Yeah.
And so we have 3 chaplains from different faith backgrounds. We have some great conversations, but we have impeccable purpose of it's not to try to get anybody to any specific faith tradition. It's to try to help them on their spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And so when they come in to talk to us, it's about let's figure it out.
Yeah. And then I know we talked about this a little bit before we got started, is what is the most common, or I would say, and I'm going to phrase this a little bit wrong, but bear with me here, like common techniques that people can use to help find that spirituality or find that religious, like something happened to them. They figure out, oh, something happened. Let's find this back. Is there any like techniques or any motivational, I wouldn't say motivational speeches, because I think that's funny when people try to do that and sometimes it doesn't work. But how do you like help them through that to try to find their way back to where they once knew they were and they're not feeling that now?
What I normally do, and I think chaplains are going to back into this differently, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to meet the person where they're at, and you're trying to help them. You're trying to walk that road with them and help them along their journey, right? So what I typically do is I typically talk about when they look back, if they have a background, like you brought up your background, if they have a background where they had some religious affiliation when they were younger or previously, I try to look at like, what part of that did you like? What part of that do you think back and you think, oh yeah, I missed that. I really liked that. I appreciated this. What part of that is you think about with fondness? And then what were the parts that you had a hard time with? And I think that there's lots of reasons why people choose to go down a different path. And there's lots of reasons why people choose to try to figure out their spirituality again.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it's trying to, for me, it's trying to understand what got them there. And I think sometimes they start back down that path because things have happened and they want that to be a part of their life. And sometimes it stopped being a part of their life. Spirituality stopped being a priority for reasons that were not caused by pain.
Yeah.
They just happened.
Yeah.
You know, they go to college, they drift into different activities. They stop going to church. They stop thinking about their spirituality. And then they wind up in basic training, and the only time that they can get away from the MTIs is to go to church.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have to clean the door for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so basic training is a tremendous spiritual indicator, because people want to get away from the yelling. And then you go into a place that's peaceful and you can think and you can have this moment of break. So, I mean, there's moments like that that are like, yeah, I do want to get this back. Or deployments another time. A lot of people get deployed. They're away from family. They're away from the kind of normal part of life. And they feel like this is something I'm missing.
Right. So we were talking a little bit before. You were talking about like the spiritualness of your individual journey. And you start realizing to yourself that something's not right, or something like family life at home, or something that's not right. I'm deployed. I really, truly want to figure out, hey, I want to get home and not have to deal with all the stuff that we were dealing with when I left. And I know it's going to be worse because I've been gone for 6 months to a year or whatever it is. You were kind of telling me about something to get prepped before you even come home. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and try to, I think the reason why I say that is because once you realize to yourself that there's something coming, to try to address it right away versus waiting until so long. And I think the spirituality and the religious part of it, I think all that encompasses self-reflection and prepping for that in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. You know, and that was a piece of my answer to your question about where do you start. Self-reflection was something that I should have started with.
No, that's right. Yeah, I get it.
Because that is core. It is looking at like, why do I want this and so forth. But the other thing that you were talking about is when I was deployed, probably the last couple of months that I was there, about half of the counselings that I would do were with the person's partner back here, home station. And so they recognized like, hey, they would come in and they would say things like, oh, my marriage is struggling and we're not communicating well, blah, 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 blah. And I know I'm going to go home and it's going to be terrible and it's hard to go home anyway. And then I would say, well, why don't we start counseling with them now? And they would look at me like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, we got Zoom. Well, we got all kinds of ways to communicate. And so that was just kind of this revolutionary idea for some people, like, oh, that's a good idea. And so we would start to do counseling and we'd meet once a week and, you know, we'd bring the spouse in, they'd join from wherever they lived in the States. And then, you know, the service member be there in the deployed location, and we just do some counseling. And man, that allowed them to prepare, that allowed them to have some conversations ahead of time about what they were feeling and thinking. So there wasn't this kind of just massive shift.
Yeah.
And I know people have conversations a lot, but there's some things that it's just helpful to have somebody else kind of mediating that conversation. And so as a chaplain, I was just doing a good job of mediating conversations. And even though they talk by WhatsApp or Zoom or whatever, FaceTime, there's all these mechanisms, they do it, but it's helpful to have somebody kind of help with that conversation.
Yeah, because it does make a difference, because I've been deployed 3 times, one right after September 11th, one before we had kids, and one after we had kids. So each deployment, you were like, oh yeah, I go there, do the same job, because I've been services 90% of my entire career until I came to the innovation team, which thank you for letting me come over here. But in that instance, it was like, I go and do the same job. Okay, cool. I know what to do. I know how to manage, all that kind of stuff. But the home life is different because it has evolved. It has changed. We've been together for so long. We were together before 9/11, after 9/11, after the second deployment, and then after we had kids. So every time we left and every time we came back, it was different. So to reflect on the differences, and each time I came back, it was hard. Was there something that you saw or that has worked other than just like the meetings and stuff, that has worked to help those that are coming home, or even those that are receiving the family while they're deployed?
And this is going to be a plug for, go back and listen to the first podcast.
Yeah.
And part of that is to say that like there's power in telling stories as we make meaning and as we prepare for the future. And sometimes, short tangent, my daughter, when I was gone, her volleyball coach was just a really, really great person who supported her a lot. Like we can do, I had a flag flown and sent it back to the volleyball team to say thanks. Yeah. So this happened. This was probably 3 months into my deployment. And the coach said, hey, Jessica's dad sent this thing back. Isn't this cool? Blah, blah, blah. Gave a kind of a presentation before one of their volleyball games. Said he's going to be watching from Qatar in the middle of the night. Let's play hard.
Yeah.
And some of her teammates were like, wait a second, your dad's deployed? And for me, when my wife told me this, I was like, are you kidding me? I've been gone for 3 months. She plays with these people every day.
And didn't say a thing.
How has she not said anything?
Yeah.
And then asking her, and she was like, well, I didn't really know what to say.
Yeah.
And that was such an eye-opener for me of like, sometimes we have to coach our kids on like, how do you tell the stories to your friends? How do you tell the people around you what's going on? And we have to coach them on what that looks like. In the same token, we have to have strategies as family on how to talk.
Right.
And sometimes, so you talked about like, you knew exactly what you were going to be doing downrange. And the third time you went, you had kids.
Yeah.
They didn't know what you were doing downrange.
Nope. They had no idea.
And even though you say, "Oh, I did the same thing over and over and over again,"
Yep,
right?
I did. Yeah.
And that's what we all say. I did the same thing over and over. But to them, it's not.
Yeah.
And to them, all you have to do is say, "I served one of the 2-star generals today. It was really cool." And the kid says, "Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's not the same thing. That's a new thing."
Yeah. Or what does 2 stars mean?
Yes.
And then it opens up the conversation like we talked about earlier.
And then they're like, "Wow, that's cool."
Yeah.
So we think it's mundane, and to them it's not.
Yeah.
And so part of what builds spirituality is about meaning. It's about purpose.
And that's the reason why I kind of asked the question again, because we're talking about the religious as the community and spirituality is the individual. So the religious part of it doesn't have to be the community of a religion itself.
Yeah.
It could be that a fellow volleyball team member.
Yeah.
It could be the group of that, like you're talking about the head coach being awesome and stuff like that. That's your community at that time.
Yes.
And that could be your spiritual community that you have.
Yep.
You're going on your individual journey, but you're doing that with a group of people that isn't religious that could help you with that spiritual journey on that instance. So
Yeah, absolutely. And anyway, I can save that. I know we'll get there.
no, that's all right. No, go ahead, because I feel like I think we're kind of in that instance anyway. So go ahead.
Okay. So what I was going to say is the irony of it is or not the irony, but the kind of beauty of this research on resilience and spirituality. So the military for a long time, resilience was the buzzword, right? Everybody was working on resilience.
I love that you can figure out what my next question is going to be based on where I'm going with it. So yeah, that's why I said, go ahead.
So for a long time, resilience was the buzzword.
Yeah.
Right. And while I think it got used so much, it lost a lot of its meaning. Part of that was unfortunate because there's some really, really good research on resilience that I'm going to tie back to spirituality. So we'll get there.
Yep.
But the interesting thing is the research on resilience that really started in the 70s. And resilience wasn't really a thing in terms of research before that. I mean, the term existed, but in terms of research, it wasn't a thing.
Right.
And where it started, ironically, is in the military. And it started on research of people who had been prisoners of war during Vietnam. And so there's a bunch of prisoners of war that once they got released, coming back to the United States and reintegrating into the U.S., there were academics, the researchers said, what's going on that some of these people came back and they were great and they went on to be senators and all these kind of tremendous people. And then there were some people that it just broke. And what's the difference?
Yeah.
Because they went through the same thing.
Yeah.
How did this have this
How did
difference?
that individual make a difference in themselves versus letting it hit them harder?
And initially they thought there must be something about these people that just makes them fundamentally different than the other people. And then they found out that was bogus.
Yeah. You start with a hypothesis and then you got to,
And then they found out that it wasn't really anything that innately was right or wrong with these people. It was beliefs and mindset that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the research on resilience has some really great characteristics of resilience. For example, one of those was that there's value in struggle.
Yeah.
That the people who went through prisoners of war camp, they went through and they saw, I am suffering here, but there's value. When I suffer, it makes me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
There's value in struggle. There's value in difficulty. And so the researchers found that this was one of the characteristics. Another important characteristic, which is where I was headed with all of this, is that they found that the people who were successful at that, they had a belief in something greater than themselves. They had a belief in a higher power that was going to look over all and that was going to be able to make good come of this terrible, inhumane situation.
Right.
And so the people that survived and the people that kept grounded, one of the characteristics of those groups of people were the people who had a belief in a higher power. And I think that research is where the military has said spirituality is an important piece, because no matter what happens, a belief that there's something greater than me and that I'm tied to this something greater than me, and that in the military I'm fighting for and with this something greater than me, alongside somebody else that's also fighting for and with this something that's greater than me.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And that's why spirituality is this core fitness. I mean, it's part of our fitness.
Right.
And so I think that's also a really critical thing, is to understand that it's part of our readiness. It's part of our fitness. And to be able to go downrange, no matter where that is, with the mindset that there's something that I'm fighting for that's bigger than me.
And taking that information with you there and then coming back is the biggest key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also helping your children or your partner or your parents see and feel I'm involved in something that's greater than me.
Yeah.
Oh, there's power in that.
Ugh.
There's resilience in that.
Yeah.
And those bad days when it's like, this is hard.
Yeah.
But there's something bigger.
So how do you understand that self-reflection to yourself, and then is there an educational part of it? We did kind of talk about this a little bit in the podcast before, but like relating that information of, oh, I just looked at myself. This is how I see things. This is my spiritual journey. How do you, I'll say it like with a significant other, how do you integrate another significant other with that outside of just communication? Because obviously, yeah, I can communicate saying this, whatever. Have you seen any better ways of not just being a solo person in that instance?
That's a good question. I think my knee jerk is that I saw a lot of people who got deployed and they said, I want this to be more a part of my life going forward. And I have ignored it for years. And deployment gives you time to kind of think about it. So they had that self-reflection time. And so they did think about it more. And then they said, I don't really even know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of it is talk to people that you do trust. And so some of it with regard to family and couples and things, it's like, well, are you talking about it? Does your partner have a place to start?
Mm-hmm.
And then if the answer is no, if the answer is we want to be a part of something as a couple that's different from both of our backgrounds.
Yeah.
Great. How do you explore those things?
Yeah.
And then usually there's a way to come up with a starting point. And the starting point being where do we start exploring and where do we look and what do we participate in? So I would oftentimes just say, okay, here's all the, in the deed, there's numerous,
right,
faith services.
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, here's all of them. Go to all of them.
Yeah.
And see what parts of it you liked about each. And then let's come back and talk.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it's just experimenting.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like the biggest thing, like I want to put this like a weird perspective a little bit. It's like, when one person likes dancing and one person doesn't, and the other person, I just go for this person. Like, and I just go with them because they like to dance and all that kind of stuff. Like, but you have to find that middle ground and find that way of going, I am willing to do this with that significant other because they need more than just themselves. Yeah. And I think that's like, to try to find an example that has nothing to do with religion or spirituality, just something that you can do together. When you're transitioning to that instance and you're trying to find yourself again, and they're coming to you and saying, okay, yep, it's time for me to be more than just myself or whatever. We want to talk about like forgiveness and gratitude and self-awareness and all that kind of stuff. How does that relate to like the spirituality and religion, and how can I forgive myself for this, or how can I forgive somebody else for that?
RJ, I'm really glad you brought this up because I think one of the things that I kind of talked about was this overly simplistic reason that sometimes people leave their faith tradition. And I talked about it in terms of like they just got busy.
Facts.
Yeah. Which happens. Yeah. It happens. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of people who leave because they were hurt. And a lot of times they were hurt by people who used religion as a weapon. Yeah. And for individuals who are manipulative, for individuals who are abusive, for especially emotionally abusive individuals. And I see this a lot as a therapist. As I work with people who have grown up in emotionally abusive environments, most of the therapy that I do is on trauma. And so as a professor, I teach people how to work with trauma, and my clinical practice is just people who have experienced significant trauma. When they grow up in those environments, one of the greatest sticks you can proverbially beat people with is God said so. Yeah. And so religion gets used as a weapon a lot because it's this, there's no greater power to beat people into submission than God. Yeah. And so when somebody is abusive, they often use God as a weapon. And as a person of faith, that's abhorrent to me. I hate that. It makes me disgusted that somebody would use a person that I see as loving and kind and use that person as a way to control and manipulate. That's deplorable. I can't stand it. Right. But it happens a lot. And so unfortunately, a lot of times people who leave religion do so because somebody's used it against them. Right. And so instead of it being a source of healing and a source of hope and a source of comfort, it becomes a source of pain. Right. As they try to find their way back to their own spirituality in whatever that's going to look like, dealing with the pain that's happened is a critical part of that healing. Right. And so some part of it is finding where they want their spirituality to be, but some part of it is letting go. And part of that comes in recognizing that the person who used religion to hurt me, that wasn't about the religious beliefs. It wasn't about the spiritual beliefs. It was about that person. Yeah. It was them. Yeah. And learning to work through that and learning to be able to say the principles, the doctrines, the teachings that are going on, they're not intended to manipulate and control. Right. People use them as such. And there are certainly leaders who unfortunately at times use them as such, as mechanisms of control. That doesn't necessarily mean that the belief system as a whole is for that reason. Anyway, I bring that up because I think this idea of forgiveness is critical. Yeah. And being able to let go and forgiveness isn't about fixing something with somebody else. It's about I'm carrying this hurt around with me. And to some degree, I have to let that hurt go. And I have to let somebody else carry that hurt.
Right.
And I have to let it go to somebody else. And if I have to think about this person who is hurtful and hateful and mean to me, if I have to think about the fact that they're going to be judged in some way by somebody, or they're going to have karma come back to them, or however you want to think about it,
Yep.
that will happen to them eventually. I don't have to keep carrying that around.
Right.
It's not my responsibility, and I don't have to.
So you're not in the term forgiveness. I just want to because to put in perspective of what you're kind of talking, the history that you have, it's not necessarily forgiving them for hurting you. It could be used in a different way.
Yeah, I think that forgiveness is an interesting thing because because on the one way, sometimes when we say things like you just did, forgiving them for hurting you, what that makes it seem like is you're saying it's okay that you did that.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not at all.
It's not. And so when someone hurts us, there's no way to say, "Oh, that's okay."
Yeah,
that's not the purpose of forgiveness.
That's more complacency than it is forgiveness.
Yeah, that is. And it's all kinds of things that are messed up because that's not okay. Right. And so forgiveness is really saying, I'm going to stop carrying it around. I'm going to put it down. Right. I'm going to put it aside. And part of that is to say, worrying about this egregious thing that you did to me isn't my responsibility. You have to take responsibility for that. So I'm going to stop carrying your responsibility around with me. And forgiveness is about then letting that go. It's an internal thing.
That's your self-reflection that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And it lets us be free of carrying that. And sometimes we need to do that in order to move past.
When is there, and again, we're talking about techniques, we're talking about recognizing the differences between religion and spirituality, but we want to understand how to get there as well. If you had that happen and now you're trying to self-reflect, now I noticed that happened. Now, how do I get to that forgiveness part of it? Or how do I get to myself to be happy with myself, like the gratitude of myself again? Is there ways to recognize that? I know each person is individual person, but is there any way to help that person get to there?
That's a complex question.
It's very
because it's a journey, right? It's a process, and it has to do with where did the pain start and where did the things start. And I think that what we can do to help them is give them some space, a place, and some space to process. And so if it's our partner, it's letting them tell their story of this kind of struggle and validating, that wasn't okay. And also validating it wasn't okay. And you don't have to keep carrying that pain. And while letting it go, part of letting it go, and one of the reasons that our brains don't let go of things is for safety purposes. So if we let go of something and letting go puts us in greater risk, our brain doesn't want to do that.
No.
So one of the absurd things about forgiveness that I hear is forgive and forget. That's complete BS.
It doesn't happen.
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. We shouldn't forget that we were hurt. We should put things in place that keep us safe. Now, we don't necessarily need to keep throwing it in somebody's face.
Right.
And so if it's our partner that's hurt us and we repair things with our partner, we don't have to keep reminding them that they were mean to us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we forget the things that we need to keep us safe. So some part of the forgiveness is helping the person that is struggling to let go of something, helping them see that they're no longer in danger. And normally when they realize I'm safe and I'm okay, then they can stop holding on to that and they can let it go. But the practices have to be put in place to make sure I'm safe before I can do that.
Right. That brings me to my one of my final questions before we wrap up is those practices and getting in that daily routine of making sure that every day is a better day than yesterday. That could be your spiritual, it could be religious, could be yourself, could be the group, all that kind of generalizations that we've talked about. What are good daily routine things that we can do? And because I know with me, I can hit that alarm and snooze it 4 or 5 times. than struggle out of bed. But like if I get in a better routine and I understand that, hey, I'm gonna have a better day, I don't have to deal with the stress that we went through yesterday, or it's a better day tomorrow. When I hit that alarm, that might wake me up and go, oh, I want to get up. I actually do want to get out of bed and go shower and get the day ready. Like, how do I get there? And that's the tough part for everybody, is that's what we're always striving for, reading the self-help books, you know, all that kind of stuff. Everybody has their example, but like in your experience, how do we get there?
In my experience, it starts with the desire and the question, the self-reflective question that you're asking me that they ask themselves. Like, what do I need to do to get there? And why? Why is it important to me to have this? Why is it important for me and my family and my life that I do this, right? And then it's a matter of, I love the book Atomic Habits, because it's not about setting goals. It's about creating habits. It's about like, if I want to be this kind of person, what does this kind of person do?
Yeah.
And so it's not like setting goals of like, I'm going to read the Bible for 30 minutes a day.
Right.
It's about like, if I want to be this kind of person, what does this kind of person act like?
Yeah. It's finding that routine that helps you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And is there specific routine things that you've found that has helped others with like talking to people and being there? Obviously, and I'll give you an example. One of mine is I work overnights, and when my alarm goes off at 3:15 in the PM in the afternoon, and the whole room is dark, I wake up, and one of my first things I do, and people laugh at me when I do this, I make my bed. And people are like, "Well, why do you even do that? Because you're gonna get back into it the next days, whatever." It's like, because it's a simple thing that I can do that I can feel accomplished first thing in the morning. I mean, it could be stretching, like people go out, stretch, go work out, all that kind of stuff, but like my first thing always is to make the bed, and it's a routine. It's something helps, but
you know, there's powerful kind of grounding routines like that, like making the bed or working out. And my wife gets up at 5 and works out every day because she loves to work out. That sounds horrible to me.
Yeah, exactly.
It does not sound good at all. And I have tried a few times, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, dear, I can't do this.
I don't know how you do this.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But for her, it's powerfully grounding. And so I think that the routines are important. The one thing I would say I think that routines are important because they become predictable, and they're something we know we look forward to. And when we do it, we feel, it feels grounding to us.
Yep.
I will say, in terms of kind of spiritual practices, I've seen all kinds of different descriptions of spiritual practices that range all over the place on what they actually look like. One characteristic that I see among all of them is they involve something quiet, and they involve something that disconnects them from the craziness of the world.
I can see that. Yeah.
So when I hear people talk about meditation or reading scriptures or going for walks or just spending alone time, they're not scrolling Instagram.
Yeah.
They're taking a minute away from the noise, and they're taking a minute to reflect, to be with themselves, to be by themselves. So one characteristic I see is solitude and quiet and unplugged.
I think it's funny that you brought that up, because I'm going to use an example. Is like, I have 2 9-year-old kids. Well, I turned 9, and they 9-year-old kids. I'll just say that. And they watch Bluey. And for a lot of people that don't know Bluey, it's a cartoon, you know, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's good for adults, good for whatever. And one of my favorite episodes is the one about mommy needs 20 minutes. And it teaches the kids, like, you know, like, where's mommy at? She's in her room. Like, don't bother her. She just needs 20 minutes. And then you're talking about the solitude thing. It's just, it's perfect parental episode. You just need the solitude for 20 minutes.
That's right. We need to pay that company.
I would tell you. And then and sometimes, you know, just 5 minutes in the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. I want to take 2 extra minutes that I need normally in there just to have that peace and quiet. So I can see that peace and quiet.
Yeah. My 17-year-old has a Bluey lunchbox, which is
awesome.
His own thing. But getting your 17-year-old to turn their phone off for a few minutes is tough.
Yeah.
Because, you know, youth today have grown up in this digital age of being plugged in, and getting them to turn it off and unplug, and then creating a practice of, when I unplug, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And at first, when they unplug and they go and they sit outside or they go for a walk or something, it's like, I'm so bored.
Yeah.
It's important to recognize that, not just for our like big picture spirituality, but for our identity development and things, there needs to be time when our brains aren't being buzzed with information.
Constant. Yeah.
And so for spirituality, I see that too, where people get practices that unplug them from the constant barrage of information. I mean, our information age is reached an era of like impossible to absorb, right? And so it's just, so that's one consistency I see, is that people who have these successful practices, they find ways to disconnect.
I can see that. Okay, so to wrap up everything before we get done here. So our main topic today was spirituality, religion, telling the differences, how to use them to beneficial life, to get them back when you're I've lost them and you're trying to find a better path for yourself, I would say. Is there anything that we missed? Because I feel like we've talked about the main topic really, really well. Don't get me wrong. But I feel like if there is any like last minute final thoughts that what is good, what is not, it's okay. It's to me in the military, it's acceptable to be this religious, spiritual, both, neither one, whatever works for you at the end of the day. Like you said, with the techniques being spiritual, your individual journey could help you no matter if it's religious or not, and being acceptable with others that have that as well. I think that's the one last thing I really want to talk about, because sometimes I'm not very religious, but I'm very spiritual. But when somebody that's very religious comes to talk to me about it, to kind of like, this is what works for me, or kind of like, I wouldn't say push their religions on me, but I'm like, in that instance, how do you accept that? How do you understand that? How do you bring that together and be able to be together no matter your points of view, I should say?
Yeah, I really like that kind of point that you're trying to make. I don't know that I have a good answer, except for to say that I think unfortunately we're in a space where having conversations with people who believe different from me, as a society, we've lost a lot of that finesse on how to do that.
Right.
And religion is one of those flashpoints where it's like, don't talk about religion.
Right.
And instead of like, it's okay to have a conversation that is, this is what I believe and this is what you believe, and we don't have to believe the same.
That's exactly what my point is. Yeah.
Yeah, like we don't have to. And when people are pushy to say we have to, then I think that we need to step back and say, this isn't about religion anymore. This is about congruence, and you want me to believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not about spirituality.
Yeah.
Because if it's about spirituality, it's about my journey and it's about your journey.
Yeah.
And if your journey and my journey are the focus, we can accept that there's going to be some differences in our journeys.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. That's where I want to be. It's where I kind of want to bring it to the end, because when we come together, and there is a slogan that I've always used, together we all succeed. If we're not doing that togetherness, no matter if you're on a separate individual journey or you're in a community journey that we talked about earlier, and if you can't figure a way to be together, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at. And then that comes to, civilian, military, wherever you use that. That's exactly where I was thinking.
Yeah. And I appreciate that for me, there are some absolutes. Right? In my faith tradition, there are some absolutes. I also have to recognize that if I want to get people to arrive at a certain point, forcing them into my absolutes isn't going to get them there ever.
No.
And I use this example. I just used it yesterday with somebody. When you think about how do you get people to a certain place, if you hold out your hand and I pour water into your hand, and the goal is to keep the most amount of water possible. And so if you think about this from spirituality and your children, if you think about your children and you're pouring into them this spirituality, right? The way to keep the most amount of water in your hand is to cup your hand and keep it open.
Yep.
And keep it open to that water. The more you squeeze, the more of that water is going to be squoze out and is going to hit the floor. And so with regard to spirituality and teaching children, you cannot squeeze them into spirituality. You want them to choose it. This has to be their spiritual journey.
I like that.
And so as you pour water into their hand, squeezing that is going to keep less and less water in their hand. And they have to be open and let that pour water into them. And so I think that that's an important principle too. Of like, as we talk to each other, it does me no good whatsoever to squeeze as hard as I can to force you into some specific belief, because in the end, that's going to keep less and less of what I believe in you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That is a fantastic analogy to bring this whole like two conversations together. I don't even know how I can't even transition to a closing for that. But all I gotta say is before we go, let's drop your contact one more time. If you are in the Nebraska area, you need to get a hold of the Corps, I should say. Go ahead, and he's gonna give you the phone number. And if there's anything else that we need to do, we'll drop it into the description below as well.
Yep. And this is the chaplain service phone. So one of us will have this all the time, 402-429-4781.
And we've been sitting down the entire time, this time and the previous podcast you missed with Lieutenant Colonel Hollist. I truly appreciate it. It's been an honor to be able to sit down with the first one and then let that simmer for everybody. And we're like, yeah, we need to have this regular conversation again. And then you decided to come back and we talk about spirituality and religion and the difference. And hopefully, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, nobody turned off once they heard those two words, and you've stuck with it at the end. So I think it's been fantastic, and I truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Thank you, RJ.
All right, have a
Great
good
to be
one.
here with you.
And back to the studio we go. Thank you so much.
A big thanks to Colonel Hollis for returning and providing a thoughtful perspective on an important and overlooked conversation. Whether you're exploring your personal beliefs or supporting someone else's journey, this discussion offers tools to help you reflect, reset, and reconnect. Speaking of pride in our people, let's highlight a few big wins from around the state. In the past few episodes, we've covered some great stories, but here are a few new updates worth celebrating. In a historic first, both an NCO and a junior enlisted soldier from the Nebraska Army National Guard are headed to the National Best Warrior competition in Maryland. That's Specialist Alexander Thompson and Sergeant Luke Entz of the 134th Infantry Regiment Airborne won their regional competition in May and will now represent Nebraska on the national stage. Also, soldiers of the Wahoo-based 623rd Engineer Company made the most of their annual training with construction, night operations, and even revitalizing Home Plate, a Cold War-era command center at the Meade training site. Projects included trenching, plumbing, electrical work, and obstacle course training, all while improving Nebraska Guard infrastructure for future use. Now, speaking of the future, here are some great events you'll want to mark on your calendar. On August 10th, it's Retiree Appreciation Day between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. at the Spirit of 1776 building. On September 6th, it's the 155th Wing Family Day starting at 2 p.m. Food, activities, music, and time with family. Speaking of music, I'll be there floating around throughout the day playing some music, so stop by, say hello, and share your thoughts on the podcast or ideas for future episodes. And also, don't forget to register for the volleyball tournament over on Knucklebusters. It's the Knucklebusters Volleyball Tournament that evening. Register now and join the fun. Let's make these moments count and continue building a connected Guard community. Now let's shift into something just as important, safety. We're in the home stretch of the 101 critical days of summer ending Labor Day weekend. So here's a few extra tips for you to stay safe. Hydrate early and often when outside. Use sunscreen, seek shade, and wear protective clothing. Watch for storm alerts and don't take unnecessarily risks. And look out for your fellow airmen and those around you. Safety is everyone's mission. And of course, if you plan to enjoy a drink, have a plan, use a ride share, or have a sober wingman. DUI prevention remains a priority, and no celebration is worth risking your career or someone else's life. Also, it's back to school time for those that have kids or if you're doing classes. Here are some walking safety tips that helps more than just students. Use the sidewalk whenever possible, and if there isn't a sidewalk, walk on the edge of the street facing traffic. I always forget about that one. Whenever they are available, use marked crosswalk to cross the street and look left, right, and then left again for vehicles and bikes before crossing. Make sure you never play, push, or shove others when you walk around traffic, and everyone should watch the road, not on their phones. Well, that's it. This podcast keeps growing thanks to you, our listeners, supporters, and sharers. Special thanks again to Colonel Hollis for returning and taking time to help us reflect on faith, purpose, and the strength we find in the community. Remember, leave a comment on Spotify or use the anonymous link feedback form linked in the description. Every comment, review, one entry into our $50 Amazon gift card giveaway. Share this episode with your fellow airmen, friends, and family. Help us boost the voice of Nebraska by liking, subscribing, and reviewing. This really helps Spotify and other apps to elevate it into others' suggested podcasts. If you know of future events we should cover, or if you would like to co-host or guest host a future episode, we would love to hear from you and have you on the podcast. Well, once again, until next time, take care, stay safe, stay connected, and keep fueling that mission. This is the Phantom Fuel Podcast, and we'll see you next month.